It's strange how betrayal never knocks, it just walks in, tracking mud across your life. The morning after the break-in, the air in my house still smelled like splintered wood and rain. The back door had been forced open, and the living room looked like someone had turned it upside down. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where my safe used to be. That safe wasn't full of cash, mostly papers, some bonds, a few old watches from my father, and a small envelope of emergency money. But it represented order, the kind of order that keeps a man steady after losing his wife and watching his daughter grow distant. My daughter, Melissa, came over later that afternoon with her husband, Kyle. He looked, composed, like a man visiting a funeral he didn't quite believe in. He patted my shoulder, said all the right things, and offered to help out with the insurance claim. I remember his cologne more than his words, expensive, sharp, something I'd never smelled on him before. When the police finished dusting for prints, Kyle pulled up in a new sedan. "Company car," he said, grinning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way he glanced toward the study, just a flicker of the eyes, but enough to freeze my gut. They say paranoia is when you start connecting dots that don't exist. But sometimes, paranoia is just delayed observation. And by the end of that week, when Kyle posted a picture of a new house, our fresh start, the caption read, I realized my paranoia had been right on time. The following days blurred together like overexposed photographs. Every morning, I'd find myself standing at the kitchen window, watching the driveway where my safe used to sit behind those walls, gone, like it had never existed. Kyle dropped by more often now. Always cheerful, always in motion. He'd joke about how Melissa finally convinced him to quit smoking, or how his new job just took off faster than expected. He smiled too much. Too wide. The kind of smile that looks like armor. Melissa seemed happy. That's what kept me quiet at first. I'd lost enough already, I didn't want to lose her too. When she laughed, I saw flashes of her mother, same tilt of the head, same spark when something delighted her. I couldn't bear to tarnish that with suspicion. But one night, she and Kyle came over for dinner, and when he excused himself to take a work call, I noticed something. The faint glow of my old wristwatch, the one my father gave me when I turned 18, peeking from his cuff. I'd kept it in the safe. I asked him about it when he came back. He froze for half a second, not long enough for a lie to form properly, but enough for the truth to flicker through. "Oh, this," he said. "Melissa got me one just like it from a pawn shop." "Crazy coincidence, huh?" Melissa laughed. I didn't. That night, I sat in the dark of my study, looking at the police report. No fingerprints, no leads, no security footage worth anything. Whoever had done it knew what to take, what mattered, not what glittered. They even left the TV and laptop. Professionals don't leave sentiment behind, but amateurs with insider knowledge do. I poured a drink, then another. The bourbon burned, but not as much as the thought forming behind it, what if it's him? I tried to push it away. I told myself I was too old for revenge stories, that the world didn't need another angry man with a theory and a bottle. But at some point, even the quiet ones snap, not from hate, but from a need to set something right before they die. The next morning, I started keeping notes. Times, visits, changes in behavior, a small ledger of unease. I didn't know what I was building yet. A case, maybe. Or a confession. One thing I did know, the truth always starts small, a watch, a smile, a lie too polished to be real. I started with small steps, not the kind that could ruin a family, just the kind that could ruin a lie. Kyle worked in construction management, supposedly. He liked to talk about projects, deadlines, the guys on site. But when I called the number on his business card one morning, it rang to a generic voicemail. No company name, no office hours. Just silence and a beep. I hung up, feeling foolish. Maybe it was just a private number. Maybe the world had changed and I hadn't kept up. But the feeling stayed, that slow itch under the skin that tells you something doesn't add up. Melissa dropped by that weekend with groceries and her usual sunshine. She wanted to show me pictures of their new house. Beige walls, shiny counters, a 2-car garage. I pretended to admire it, but my eyes locked on the details, the size of the place, the model of that SUV in the driveway. Neither of them could afford that. Not honestly. I asked how they managed it, keeping my tone soft, just a curious father. She smiled. Kyle got a bonus, Dad. He's been working so hard. A bonus. That word sat in my head like a pebble in a shoe. That night, I opened the old notebook I used for expenses when my wife was alive. I drew 2 columns, before the robbery and after the robbery. Underneath, I listed everything that changed. New car. New house. New clothes. His sudden confidence. My missing safe. I even added the detail about the watch, a small, traitorous tick of my father's memory now strapped to another man's wrist. I didn't want to write it down. Writing makes things real. A few days later, I found an excuse to drive past their new place. It was in a quiet development north of town, all manicured lawns and polite mailboxes. Kyle's truck was parked outside, bed full of tools, but they looked staged. New. Like props. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, just watching. The air felt thick, like a confession waiting to be spoken. Then he came out, phone to his ear, laughing. The sound carried through the open window. Yeah, man, we cleaned it good. Easy job. No cameras. He's old, won't suspect a thing. I froze. The rational part of me, what was left of it, said I misheard. That laughter distorts everything. But another part of me, the part that still believed in quiet justice, started to burn. I drove home in silence. The notebook sat on the passenger seat, open to that list of changes. Beside the last entry, I wrote just one line: confirm everything before you act. Because revenge without proof is just another sin. Truth doesn't shout. It whispers until you finally stop pretending you can't hear it. I spent the next week in quiet reconnaissance, the kind of old man detective work that doesn't make it into movies. Checking dates, bank alerts, corners of memory. Nothing dramatic, just patience dressed as routine. One morning, I walked into the pawn shop on 3rd Street. The same one I'd used years ago when money was tight after my wife's illness. The bell over the door jingled, and the smell hit me: dust, oil, old metal. The owner, Eddie, was still there. He used to buy old watches, and he remembered me. Didn't you have a Seiko with an engraving on the back? To Frank, time is what you make of it. I nodded. My throat went dry. You seen it lately? He rubbed his chin, thinking. Couple months ago, guy brought it in. Said it was his father-in-law's gift. Wanted cash quick. I didn't buy it, he got offended and left. I didn't need a name. My knees nearly gave out. Outside, I sat in the truck for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. That phrase, father-in-law's gift, looped in my head like static. My hands shook, not from rage but from the slow realization that my life had been robbed twice, once by force, once by trust. I could have gone straight to the police, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid they'd do nothing. Maybe I was afraid they'd do something, and Melissa would see her husband in handcuffs. So I did what cowards and fathers often do, nothing, but thoroughly. That night, I opened Kyle's Facebook page. He wasn't careful. In one photo, taken a few days after the robbery, I zoomed in on the background. There it was, the small bronze eagle figurine from my study shelf. It had been a gift from my late wife. I could see the chipped wing. I downloaded the image, printed it, and laid it beside the police report. 2 proofs. No more guessing. But the strangest thing wasn't anger, it was calm. A terrifying calm that settles in when the worst has already happened and you're just waiting to decide what kind of man you'll be afterward. For days, I barely spoke. Melissa called, invited me for dinner, and I agreed. I needed to see him, face to face, and decide whether the truth would stay buried or burn everything left between us. Before leaving, I stood in front of my wife's photo. "You tell me to forgive," I whispered. But what if forgiveness just feeds the wolf? Her eyes, forever caught in that black and white smile, didn't answer. But the silence felt like permission. Melissa set the table like she always did when she wanted peace: candles, cloth napkins, too much food for 3 people. I could tell she'd spent hours trying to make it perfect. Maybe she felt the distance too, the invisible line that had started cutting through every conversation since the robbery. Kyle came out of the kitchen with a bottle of wine. "Thought we'd celebrate the new place," he said. His smile was polished now, like something he practiced in the mirror. I sat across from him, my old watch glinting faintly from his wrist every time he reached for the salt. The sound of cutlery and small talk filled the room like background noise in a dream. He asked about my health, my hobbies, whether I was doing okay. I nodded, but every word out of his mouth felt rehearsed. When he poured me wine, his hand trembled for just a moment, the smallest crack in his composure, but enough. "You know," I said quietly, "it's funny how things disappear and reappear in this world. Like timepieces. Or trust." He froze mid-sip. Melissa looked up, confused. "Dad?" "Just thinking out loud," I said, forcing a small smile. "Eddie down on 3rd Street still runs that old pawn shop. Haven't been there in years, but he remembers me." The color drained from Kyle's face so fast it almost made me pity him. Almost. Melissa started talking about something else: recipes, renovations, trying to patch whatever rift she felt without knowing what caused it. I let her. Sometimes truth needs witnesses who don't understand the scene until the curtain drops. When dessert came, I excused myself and went to the study, Kyle's study now, technically. On the shelf, I saw the bronze eagle, its chipped wing catching the light. My wife's memory, sitting on another man's shelf like a souvenir. I turned it over. On the base, my handwriting, "To Margaret, my forever storm." He hadn't even bothered to scratch it out. When I came back, Kyle's chair was empty. I heard the bathroom door close upstairs. Melissa was humming, serving cake, still believing in normal. A part of me wanted to scream the truth right then, to tear it all open, make her see. But the other part, the older, quieter one, knew it wouldn't bring peace. It would only replace her laughter with my bitterness. So I waited until he came back, face pale, hands damp. He didn't look at me. I raised my glass and said, "To family. The only thing that survives theft, if you're lucky." He nodded without meeting my eyes. The air was so thick you could have cut it with a spoon. When I left that night, Melissa hugged me tight. "You okay, Dad?" "I will be," I said. And for the first time, I almost believed it. But as I walked to my truck, I saw Kyle through the window, staring at me with the expression of a man who realizes the game's over, and doesn't yet know which punishment he fears more, exposure, or my silence. After that dinner, silence became its own kind of punishment. Days passed without calls from Melissa, and I didn't reach out either. I told myself I was giving her space, but really, I was hiding, from the truth, from what I might do if I saw that watch again. Each morning I sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper folded neatly in half, pretending to read. My mind wandered to darker corners. There's something corrosive about knowing someone's guilt and choosing not to act. You start bargaining with yourself, maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was just one mistake. But then you remember how calm he looked, how steady his hand was when he poured the wine. I went fishing one afternoon, my first time in years. The lake was quiet, the kind of quiet that reminds you the world keeps turning whether you make peace or not. I didn't catch a thing, but sitting there, I thought about my wife again. About how she'd hated anger because it multiplies faster than forgiveness. Maybe that was her way of telling me what to do now. The next day, I drove back to the pawn shop and asked Eddie if he'd seen the man again. No, he said. But I remember his eyes. Scared eyes, like he was already caught. That image stayed with me, not as satisfaction, but as sorrow. I realized I didn't want to destroy Kyle. I wanted him to face himself, and maybe that was worse. So I wrote a letter. Not to him, to Melissa. I told her I loved her, that I'd always love her, no matter what truths she might discover about the man she chose. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers. I only wrote one sentence that mattered: a home built on lies will eventually collapse on those inside it. Then I sealed the envelope and left it in my desk drawer. Weeks later, I saw them again at a family gathering. He avoided me entirely. I watched him from across the yard, the way he couldn't hold anyone's gaze for long, the way his laughter sounded brittle now. Melissa smiled less too. Life had started to weigh on them, not from anything I did, but from the gravity of their own secret. That night, driving home, I felt lighter. Justice hadn't been served in the way stories promise, but something quieter had happened: balance. The world has a strange way of evening its scales. You don't always need to swing the hammer, sometimes you just have to step back and let the cracks spread on their own. Still, before I went to bed, I took out my notebook and crossed out the final line. Confirm everything before you act. Under it, I wrote, sometimes, confirmation is enough. Time doesn't heal everything, it just exposes the cracks more clearly. Months slipped by. Autumn came, and with it, the kind of wind that smells like endings. I'd stopped keeping the ledger by then, the story had moved beyond my control. One Sunday, Melissa called. Her voice trembled between cheer and exhaustion. Dad, Kyle's been distant lately. He says work's stressing him out. I told her stress makes cowards honest. She laughed softly, not catching the meaning. When they came to visit a week later, I almost didn't recognize him. Kyle had lost weight. His tan was gone, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. The watch, my watch, was missing from his wrist. Maybe he'd sold it again, or maybe he just couldn't stand to wear it anymore. Either way, the absence suited him. Melissa tried to keep conversation light, but everything about them felt staged: forced laughter, hands that didn't touch. The air between them hummed with something unspoken. Guilt makes noise, even when you can't hear it. After they left, I sat on the porch until the sky turned violet. I thought about revenge, how it always promises closure but delivers corrosion. Yet somehow, not acting, letting time do the work, had become its own form of justice. Slow. Patient. Humane, even. Winter arrived. Through quiet whispers around town, I learned Kyle had lost his job. Something about discrepancies, missing funds, errors in management. The universe, it seemed, had a poetic sense of bookkeeping. Melissa moved back in with me for a while. She never said why, and I never asked. She spent her days cooking, cleaning, avoiding her phone. At night, she'd sit in the living room staring at the framed picture of her mother. Once, I caught her whispering something to it. I didn't listen. Some prayers aren't meant for witnesses. A few days before Christmas, there was a knock at the door. Kyle. He looked smaller, like a man shrunk by the weight of his own choices. I came to apologize, he said. I can't fix what I did. I thought I could outrun it. I said nothing. The silence between us was the kind that belongs in confessionals. He looked past me toward Melissa's voice in the kitchen. Does she know? No, I said. And she doesn't need to. She'll figure out who you are by who you become next. He nodded slowly, eyes glassy, then turned and left without another word. The sound of his footsteps on the snow was softer than forgiveness, but heavier than guilt. That night, I sat by the window, watching flakes drift down. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. The world kept turning, broken people trying to find new shapes for their regrets. And for the first time in years, I whispered my wife's name and meant it as peace, not penance. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a long, slow erosion, like water wearing down stone until something gentler takes its place. After that winter night, Kyle vanished from our lives for a while. No calls, no visits. Melissa stopped asking questions after the first few weeks. I think she sensed that silence sometimes answers more than words ever could. She found work at a local school, started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. Watching her brush color back into her days made me realize that pain, when left alone long enough, finds its own palette. One morning in early spring, I got a letter. No return address, just my name written in that uneven, familiar scrawl. Inside was a single page. Frank, you were right. About everything. I thought I was smarter than life, but it's patient, and it always comes for the debt. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, just your understanding. Tell Melissa I'm sorry when she's ready to hear it. Kyle. I read it 3 times, then folded it neatly and set it in my desk drawer beside the old ledger. The irony wasn't lost on me, the thief returning, not what he stole, but the only thing of value left, honesty. For a while, I hated that letter. It felt too little, too late. But as the weeks passed, I found myself rereading it on quiet nights. There was something painfully human in his words, something that mirrored my own years of grief after losing Margaret, that desperate need to be seen not as what we did, but as what we tried to become after. In April, Melissa told me she'd filed for separation. Her voice was calm, not bitter. I think we both need to start over, she said. I just wish Mom were here to tell me how. She is, I said. Just listen to what you already know. We spent that evening sitting on the porch, watching the sun melt into gold. She leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to as a little girl. For the first time in years, the house felt full again, not with people, but with forgiveness breathing through its walls. Later, when I went to my study, I opened the drawer. The ledger. The letter. The photo of Margaret. All 3 staring back like a trinity of lessons: truth, consequence, grace. I took out the old bronze eagle and set it by the window. Its chipped wing caught the light of the fading sun, glinting faintly, broken, but still beautiful. That night, I dreamt of the lake. Calm water. No storm. Just the sound of time moving, steady and unjudging. It was late summer when I saw him again. The air was heavy with that humid stillness before rain, the kind that makes old bones ache with memory. I was leaving the grocery store, arms full of paper bags, when he stepped out from behind a car. Kyle. He looked older, more than a year should have made him. His hair was thinner, his clothes plain. But there was something clean in his eyes now, like someone who'd finally stopped running. Frank, he said. Just my name, no pretense. For a long moment, we just stood there among strangers coming and going, as if time had paused for 2 men trying to decide what comes after justice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I don't have much left, he said, but this belongs to you. Inside was my watch. The Seiko, its glass slightly scratched, still ticking. He must have kept it all this time, through guilt, through distance. I didn't come for forgiveness, he added quickly. I came because I wanted to give back what I stole. And because, you were the only one who never lied about who I was. I looked at him for a long time, really looked. The arrogance, the swagger, the mask, all gone. Just a tired man trying to stitch a hole in his soul. I took the watch, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. You know, I said, this old thing doesn't keep perfect time anymore. Loses a few minutes every day. He nodded. So do I. We both smiled, not warmly, but honestly. Then the first drops of rain started to fall, slow and soft. He turned to leave. "Take care of her," I said quietly. He paused, not turning around. "I will. Even if it's from a distance." When he walked away, I slipped the watch on. The band was loose now. Age does that, to leather, to people, to everything that once fit perfectly. That night, back home, I sat at the kitchen table listening to the rain on the roof. The watch ticked faintly beside my cup of tea. Each tick felt less like a reminder of what was lost and more like a heartbeat for what remained. For the first time, revenge didn't feel like victory or defeat. It felt like release, the moment when you finally stopped carrying someone else's sin in your pocket. I went to bed early that night. Slept deep. Dreamed of nothing. And that, I realized, was its own kind of redemption. I used to think life was about what you keep. The house. The family. The order you build around yourself to keep the dark out. But the older I get, the more I realize it's about what you can finally let go of. The safe they stole from me, it wasn't just metal and numbers. It was the illusion that I could protect everything I loved if I just locked it tight enough. Turns out, nothing worth keeping fits in a box anyway. These days, the house is quiet but not empty. Melissa still visits on weekends, bringing her students drawings and stories that make her laugh. There's a new lightness in her. She doesn't talk about Kyle much, but sometimes I catch her looking at the horizon like someone who forgave more than one person to find herself again. The bronze eagle still sits by the window, chipped wing and all. It catches the sunrise every morning, scattering light across the floor. I like to think Margaret would have appreciated that, how even broken things can make a room brighter. Sometimes I walk down to the lake, though I don't bother bringing a rod anymore. I just sit on the dock, watching the ripples, listening to the world breathe. The water doesn't care who was right or wrong, it only remembers that everything returns eventually. I wear the watch again. It still loses a few minutes a day, but I've stopped resetting it. There's something honest in its imperfection. Each missed minute feels like a tribute to the moments I once wasted on anger. If someone asked me now whether I ever got my revenge, I wouldn't know how to answer. Because revenge isn't about what you do to someone else. It's about what you stop doing to yourself. I stopped rehearsing the pain. I stopped waiting for apologies that couldn't fix anything. I stopped mistaking punishment for peace. Now, when the evening light spills across the kitchen table, I sometimes whisper to the quiet, "It's done." And I mean it. The world doesn't need my rage, it needs my stillness. My forgiveness. My memory of how close I came to letting hatred write the rest of my story. And if there's a heaven, I like to think Margaret's there, laughing softly at how long it took me to understand what she always knew, that justice isn't balance, it's release. The watch ticks. The water ripples. The world moves on. And for once in my long, stubborn life, so do I. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can continue the journey by clicking the box on the left. Thank you for being here.